Hi, my name is Dr. Kay, and in this presentation, we will discuss the final sections of your research project: the discussion, implications, limitations, recommendations for future research, and conclusion. Let's start with a quick overview of what we will cover in this video. We'll begin with how to write a strong discussion section and then go over framing your implications. We will also talk about identifying limitations and making realistic recommendations for future research. Finally, we will cover what makes a strong, lasting conclusion. These final sections of your research project bring your study full circle. They move your writing from reporting data to interpreting data. This is your chance to explain why your study matters and how it can inform real-world practice. These sections leave the reader with a clear message and show the value of your work. First, let's talk about the discussion or interpretation of your results. As the name of this section tells, this is where you discuss your findings. The purpose of the discussion is to interpret your results, not repeat them. In Chapter 4, you presented what your data showed. In the discussion, you explain what those results mean in the context of your research questions, your theoretical foundations, and the literature you presented in Chapter 2. This section is where you move beyond description into analysis and reflection. A strong discussion ties your findings to the literature you explore in Chapter 2. That means pointing out which of your results support or contradict previous studies and how your study advances, challenges, or deepens that body of knowledge. The discussion should also revisit your theoretical framework or theoretical foundations you use to build your study. A good discussion also considers why your findings turn out the way they did. This section should not be a summary of results or a personal reflection. It should be a thoughtful and analytical section and clearly grounded in your study. A strong discussion section stays focused on your research questions. Everything you say in this section should relate back to the questions you originally set out to answer. You should also draw from the most relevant literature in Chapter 2 and use your theory to support your interpretations. Another important aspect in writing this section is to distinguish your own results from those of other researchers, and you can do so by using clear phrasing such as this study, present research, and similar when referring to your study, and using citations when discussing prior research. Throughout this section, ensure your tone remains scholarly, cautious, and analytical. Avoid generalizations or emotional reactions, as your goal is to critically reflect on your findings. On this slide, you can see several examples of the language that can be used to strengthen your discussion and interpretations. You can pause the video to read each example. To help keep your discussion clear and grounded, use language that shows alignment with your research questions and the literature. For example, refer to your theoretical lens or particular literature when interpreting what your findings suggest. You should also show where your results confirm or challenge previous studies using citations from your literature review. When writing about your study, use phrases like "the current study found" to clearly distinguish your contributions from what others have reported. Overall, ensure that your discussion stays objective and your interpretations stay cautious. Do not overreach or make claims your data cannot fully support. There are a few common mistakes that can weaken your discussion section. One is simply restating your results without offering any interpretation. Another is bringing in new findings that were not already presented in Chapter 4. This can confuse your reader and undermine the structure of your study. You also want to avoid ignoring your research questions, theory, or the literature you previously discussed. Using overly casual or emotional language like shocking or surprising can also reduce the professionalism of your writing. Finally, don't make overly broad generalizations that your data cannot fully support. Your goal is to be objective, clear, and accurate. There are a few common mistakes that you want to avoid when writing the discussion section. You can pause the video to read the examples on this slide. One of the biggest mistakes is restating your results without offering any interpretation. Simply repeating what your tables or participants said doesn't move your analysis forward. Instead, you need to explain what those results mean. Another mistake is introducing new findings that were not presented in Chapter 4. This creates confusion and breaks the structure of your study. You also want to avoid ignoring your research questions, literature, or theory. Your discussion should stay clearly connected to these elements. Your tone matters as well. Avoid casual language like "it was shocking" or "very interesting," and don't overestimate what your data can prove. Finally, avoid making generalizations that go beyond what your study can reasonably support. In this section, we will learn best practices for writing the implications of your study. After you discuss your results, the next section focuses on implications. This is where you explain why your findings matter, not just in theory, but in practice. In this section, you explain how your study contributes to addressing the problem you identified in Chapter 1. You should also consider who your results are relevant to, whether that's leadership, policymakers, instructors, practitioners, or other stakeholders. You also propose the actions or decisions your findings can help inform. This section is where your research begins to connect to the real world. Strong implications are grounded in your actual findings and tailored to your intended audience. Instead of writing in vague terms, identify who exactly might benefit from your work and how. In doing so, stay within the boundaries of your study. You are not expected to solve every problem, but to offer suggestions for improvement based on your data. The best implications are realistic and offer actionable insight into how your study can be used to guide practice, policy, or decision-making. Use this section to show the real-world value of your research. As with the discussion, avoid generalizations when writing about your implications. Saying that your study has implications for everyone in education is too broad. Instead, focus on specific groups that are directly connected to your topic. Rather than making demands like colleges must do this, use language that suggests thoughtful application like colleges may consider. This cautious tone helps you maintain a scholarly voice while still highlighting the practical usefulness of your work. Now let's go over the final reflective piece of your study, limitations and recommendations for future research. As we learned when we discussed Chapter 1, limitations are factors that were outside of your control and that may have affected the outcomes. In this section, do not restate the limitations you identified in Chapter 1, as those were your anticipated limitations before conducting your study. Here, reflect on what actually happened during your study and the limitations you could not have known before conducting your research. For example, did any issues come up during data collection? Were there limitations in your sample, your method, or your instruments? This section is not about being negative or discounting the value of your research. On the contrary, it is about adding value to your study by being honest and reflective. Acknowledging your limitations shows that you understand the boundaries of your study and are thinking critically about your research process. As you can read on this slide, there are many types of limitations that can happen during a study. For example, your participant group may have been unbalanced, or your timing may have influenced who responded. You might have faced institutional barriers that limited access to certain data or individuals. Maybe your survey or interview questions didn't fully capture a concept or participants misunderstood key terms. Or perhaps the incentive you offered drew responses from one group more than another. As you can see, you could not have known about any of these limitations when you wrote Chapter 1, which is why we have dedicated space in this section to reflect on them. They are important to reflect on as each of these factors may influence how your findings should be interpreted, and it's important to openly acknowledge them. Based on your discussion and limitations, you will then propose recommendations for future research. These recommendations should build directly from what you found and what you were not able to explore in your own study. Remember that you are not proposing a whole new study here. Instead, you are suggesting the next logical steps someone could take to build on your work, address gaps, or investigate new questions that emerged. This is your opportunity to guide future researchers. Strong recommendations are specific, realistic, and clearly connected to your study. Avoid vague suggestions like more research should be done. Instead, suggest a clear direction, such as a different population, an expanded methodology, or a focus on a theme you couldn't explore in depth. Your recommendations should be manageable and grounded in the scope of what is possible. This is where you offer guidance that someone else could reasonably follow to extend your research in a meaningful way. On this slide, you can see some examples of what to avoid when writing recommendations. A common mistake is being overly broad or vague. For instance, saying future research should include more participants doesn't offer any direction or context. Another vague example might be that future studies should use quantitative methods as your study was qualitative. Your research design is not a limitation. Remember that this was your intentional choice and you dedicated an entire chapter 3 to justify your choice. Remember that limitations are out of your control and the outcome of factors you cannot influence. Here are some additional examples. Saying that the study didn't have enough participants, so future research should get more, is too general. Instead, propose a clear method for expanding your sample, such as using institutional data sets or surveys that already include a larger population. Another issue is suggesting a topic that doesn't align with your purpose. Your goal for this section is to make sure your recommendations are both feasible and closely tied to your study. Finally, let's go over what makes a good conclusion of a research study. Conclusion is your closing statement and the paragraph or section where you bring everything together. Your conclusion should revisit your study's purpose and leave your reader with a clear understanding of what you accomplished. This is your chance to emphasize the significance of your work and provide a sense of closure. Think of it as your final message. What do you want your audience to remember most? To conclude, here are a few ideas for how to end your study with a strong conclusion. You might briefly restate your purpose and highlight what your study contributed. You can reflect on what you hope others will take away from your work and how it might be used in the future. Even if your study was limited in scope, you can still show how it fits into a larger conversation. Your tone should be confident and reflective, showing that you understand the value of your work and where it fits in your field. Thank you for watching this video and good luck as you write final sections of your study.